Okay, fantastic. This is Josh Hollander of the InsurTech Leadership Podcast, and I'm excited today to be joined by Jane Tran. She is co-founder and chief operating officer of Sixfold AI, a fast-growing InsurTech that's reimagining the underwriting process through the practical use of artificial intelligence. Jane's journey started on Wall Street at JP Morgan, followed by leadership roles in strategy and innovation at Marsh and MetLife. She then became part of the founding team at Unqork, where she helped scale the no-code pioneer into a global enterprise before co-founding Sixfold. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you. Good to be chatting.
Yeah, great. So, maybe we could just, for those who don't know, start with just a little bit at a high level about Sixfold and maybe fill in some of the blanks there from my intro.
Yeah. So Sixfold, we're an underwriting AI. That's all we wake up doing. But basically, our secret sauce is that we built a underwriting brain that really understands underwriting. And when we work with our customers, which are usually carriers and MGAs, we'll basically take in their underwriting manual and some backbook submissions. We'll basically create a baseline of those underwriting results. It'll iterate over time, but then it can slide in production to wherever underwriting exists to give the underwriters those insights, the analysis that they need to make, just better underwriting decisions faster and more consistently.
Got it. So in this model, people are talking about AI, human in the loop, increasing productivity and leverage, doing a better job analyzing risk and, choosing the type of business you want to underwrite. So, are you sort of touching all these things? Are you leaning into one area in particular? What separates you from maybe some of the other approaches people are taking to modernizing underwriting?
Yeah, again, we're really just focused on only underwriting. We don't do claims. It's just sort of that piece of it. Generally, the problems that we focus on are the ones that you would think about, right? Like, is there a bottleneck in terms of capacity because you're just getting so many submissions? So in that instance, how are we basically help the underwriter triage and prioritize the submission? Another really big common problem we have is like, all right, now as an underwriter, I'm spending so much time just doing a lot of research and going through all these crazy documents to just come up with an opinion about this risk. How does Sixfold then help them sort of do that piece of it? And more recently, we just launched something called Referral Agent. That's now like, I know your risk, I know everything that's coming in, and I know your referral sort of guidelines. How can I then now help you see whether or not a referral needs to be triggered, and then also write the email to your underwriting manager to sort of do the review?
Got it. And so is it so that relationship sort of between the underwriters and the underwriting manager, is that sort of more bottom up the way you described, or is there also sort of more of a dashboard for the underwriting managers and they can kind of tune things a bit or determine, how they want to allocate amongst the team or types of business that they want to focus on, et cetera?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can be. So we've primarily focused on the underwriter themselves, right? So like, how do we make their field underwriting just better? And so it could take the form of a UI. It could take the form of just emails. It could take the form of an API into a workbench, that type of thing. I think that's sort of the beauty of where we went into market, right? So we don't necessarily need to own the glass. We actually prefer not to, but we'll sort of bolt on to your existing systems so that, again, wherever you sort of need that help for that specific underwriting problem, we can sort of just slide in.
Got it. And are there certain, lines of business or segments of the market where you're seeing the most traction?
Yeah, so when we first started, we originally thought we'd spend more of our time in the specialty markets, just given the technology. But actually, we were surprised when a lot of our customers brought us into middle markets, into a lot more of their flow businesses. And what we realized, and it goes back to my original comment about we just do underwriting, is the underwriting problem sort of flavors of it exists across all forms of underwriting. And so we found that we don't really have a concentration on a specific line of business. It's just, as long as we built the functionality to underwrite, we can sort of hit those different sort of bottlenecks or those pain points, regardless of the business unit or the LOB.
Got it. And were there alternate solutions that your customers were using previously, or is this typically kind of their first foray into some kind of AI-enabled underwriting solution?
Yeah, for the most part, we were more or less the first solution that they've used, right? Because oftentimes, and we've all been part of these programs before, where there's workflow tools, there's all of these other things, but a lot of the actual function of underwriting sometimes happens outside of systems or between systems. And for us, it's that's what we're sort of capturing with our AI brain. And sort of sliding that in. So they are doing it. They're probably just doing it not within a system, probably somewhat manually. And we're just sort of quantifying that now.
And I just want to make sure I understand. So it sounds like there's flexibility to integrate the analysis you're able to provide in different ways, but is there sort of a most common setup? Is it something that stands side by side with their typical underwriting workbench, or what's their typical user experience like?
So the most common thing that we're actually integrated with is emails. Okay. Unsurprisingly, actually, because we're that close to sort of helping the underwriter get a quote out. And what's super fascinating about how I will say technology really caught up is it doesn't really matter how something comes in anymore, because the technology is now good enough to actually read it. Before we were all thinking we have to digitize everything, we have to put it in a formalized place to then use it within our workflow. But now actually a lot of these models, even ChatGPT, is so good at some of these things that you don't need to anymore. So normally how people interact with us is that an email comes in from a broker, they can send it to a shared mailbox, they can drag it into our system, or sometimes they have an API into our platform as well, and then it creates all of the analysis right then and there. We can choose to, the underwriter can choose to log on to review that. They can choose to sort of review it within their workbench or their CRM tool. But basically, we sort of meet the underwriter where they are on how they would like to analyze.
Got it. And so is the biggest impact around the efficiency? Is it around just better underwriting decisions? Is it, where do you see the biggest impacts?
We think the biggest impact is really around increasing the gross written premium per underwriter. Right? We know that we're spending a lot of time doing a lot of things that are not underwriting. And Ideally, what we want to spend more time doing is spend more time with your brokers, with your end customers, and really do less of all that legwork stuff that you don't really enjoy doing anyway. And so our whole goal is to give the underwriter time back so they can do more of the value add work.
And following up on that, in terms of from an agent's or a broker's perspective, how does it impact them? How does it kind of improve their life? Have you seen companies, pick up more flow because the agents and the brokers are getting a better experience from this?
Yeah. And so for some of our earlier customers, they're already seeing about a 30% improvement increase in gross written premium. And then I'm assuming it's because they're underwriting more business. So hopefully you'll at least get a faster time to get a quote back. And then also our whole goal is if we free up that time for that underwriter, the underwriter can actually spend more time with the broker to strategize on how to actually win that risk, to how to actually make that risk work. And so that's sort of the big impact I can see for the brokers.
Got it. And has there been any issue, or what have the issues been in kind of building trust between humans and their traditional ways of doing things and having this type of an AI system directly involved in underwriting?
Yeah, I think the big thing here is there's a few I would say a few levers of trust. The first thing is actually accuracy. A lot of the time using technology like this, accuracy is basically the conduit for trust, right? So we very early on had to build our own tooling to actually measure accuracy in a consistent way, so we can say with confidence, like, we know that we are X% factual accurate. And then when we say that, because we can sort of show that when we say that to the customer, and the underwriter is like, okay, yes, that's very much aligned. And then the other piece of it is then also providing a lot of the transparency aspects, right? So we spend a lot of time around a responsible AI framework to make sure that, like, the underwriters can sort of see where the data is coming from, if they have to audit the work, so they actually see the logic of how we came to a decision. And we think that's a really good foundation. The other huge lever is that it's still actually a change management exercise like you have with any other technology, right? If you want to drive that adoption, you have to spend time with the underwriters to sort of say, like, hey, this is how you use it. This is sort of what you should expect, sort of those types of things. And also, again, like, meeting them where they are. One of the most widely used sort of features of our platform is something what we call narratives, because as an underwriter, you have to provide the justification of the risk, right? You have to summarize the risk, provide the justification, so you can store it in your policy center or your manager for peer review. And the way that we built it is actually very similar to the way that they write it today. And so it was such an easy sort of translation layer to say, like, oh, I can see real value from this because I spend so much time doing this. I believe in it. I know I have to do it, but you already gave me a fast track into doing that. And so how do we then show the underwriter that value quite immediately to help drive some of that adoption, to then sort of also do the change management in their workflow, and have that snowball effect?
And I know I've worked with some organizations that have tried to do things like, implement some level of gamification or do other things to try to drive behaviors in, adopting some of these new technologies. Have you seen any kind of methodologies that have worked well to, help get people comfortable and push them to, use these types of systems? And on the other side, have you seen any examples, or do you have any lessons learned about, things you've seen maybe insurers get wrong about trying to implement AI into their workflows?
Yeah, I think the big thing here is on the adoption piece. Sort of, it's not that different than everything I just mentioned. Actually, it's all the same thing around. It's all the first principle things that right? Just because it's generative AI, it doesn't make it any different than how you've sort of rolled out other pieces of technology. Actually, the only real difference here is that I think it happened a lot faster than the previous sort of types of digital or new technology things that came out into the market. And so I think that's sort of the big takeaway there. In terms of things that I've seen maybe not work as well, I think it's sort of assuming that. Actually, let's go back to the gamification piece one more time, because there is some things that I think is really actually really great learnings from even the foundational models like the OpenAI and Claude's. They came out with a report a couple months ago saying that when you sort of deploy these solutions, just make sure you give people an out, especially the more product-like growth, the more self-service it is. And that makes a huge sense, right? Because, like, if you're always giving your if you're only giving an output and you're not getting a method to get the feedback, then the underwriters don't have an out, right? So for us, it's like, all right, how do we give them the out so we get the feedback, sort of do the iterations? In the beginning, we used to have this thumbs up, thumbs down. We still have that. We did iterations with the underwriters, and that was really helpful. And then now we're to a scale where like, all right, we have to sort of embed all of that feedback into the product. So then again, giving the people the out to say like, all right, if this is sort of like what you want, but not exactly, how do I give you that feedback so then we can sort of make those iterations even faster as you scale with my organization. That's
Got it.
that, we learned sometimes the hard way, but we really, really, and then for the other piece of it is in terms of seeing things that may not have worked so well is assuming that the usability for your customer, in this case, your users, before actually knowing how they were going to use it. So a big hypothesis that we had when we first started the company was that we actually don't think that a chatbot is the best mechanism to deliver what we're trying to deliver for underwriters. And so it's been 2.5 years. We sometimes get the question, but we rarely get the question of like, oh, do you guys have a chatbot? Because we actually don't believe that the best way to, for you to do your underwriting analysis is in a chatbot. And after a lot of the research that we did, like, again, it's like, again, meeting where the underwriters are when they're sort of doing it, which maybe in some instances to resolve something, it may be a chatbot, but at least for that initial sort of analysis, we don't believe so.
Got it. And I guess one other point before I segue on. So I think you guys have made a big point about sort of transparency in AI and, how, it makes sense, but how have you been able to kind of deliver that? How have you been able to get potential customers, more comfortable because you're proactively offering that?
Yeah, so that was the first thing we tackled actually. So we were lucky enough to sort of chat with the Commissioner of Colorado, the NAIC, and a few others, the people that were pretty early on in terms of the use of AI in insurance. And that's all embedded into the way that we built our business and our technology. So we built a responsible AI framework as part of the very, very first thing that, sort of one of the very first things that we did. So we can actually provide that transparency. Because the big thing here is like, can the AI show its work? And so we built that functionality into the platform to give that transparency to our users. Because even if the users don't care, their compliance team may care, or the regulators may care.
Right.
Again, sort of covering your bases within that. And so as we've sort of gone, as we've sort of grew over the years, that's still something that we're investing in. We actually most recently were on a talk with Committee H of the NAIC around basically our new sort of bias testing. So we because these large language models are probabilistic, not deterministic, we had to come up with a new methodology to detect bias within the models. So we basically came up with a way to do counterfactual bias testing. So we can have statistical confidence that we don't see it within the results. And so that's the cool part, I think, also about sort of how we've been partnering with a lot of the regulators to also provide that transparency to our customers, because this technology is still so new. Kudos to everyone for being ahead of it, actually. And now we have to go to that next level of granularity on the details, both to the technology companies, to the carriers, to say like, all right, these are the best practices on what we should do now that we know a little bit more.
Do you have any opinion on kind of where the third-party AI rules are headed, or any concerns about as more state governments, more legislatures start putting policy into law, that some of that language may make it challenging to continue to operate an AI driven model like this?
Could you elaborate a little bit more on that? Like, meaning the
Well,
impact?
you've had like, I know, California just activated some of their new law. Colorado just activated some new law. Through the work I do with the InsurTech Association, we've done some work with AITC, and it sounds like sometimes, particularly if you get into anything related to consumers, that local legislators become very protective, and sometimes there's unintended consequences from the way they write the laws and implement them. So that's really more of what I was driving at.
Yeah, I don't think I know enough about the, maybe some of the newer state laws around this, but
Yeah.
what I will say, in the general themes of what we found is that we do know that people are going to adopt this technology in some shape or form, but we do need to make sure that the protections are in place to protect consumers. And historically, that has been around the things like bias, like things like non-standard underwriting criteria. But I think what we would actually do is flip it, right? So if we are still using standard underwriting criteria, if we are still testing for bias, if we are still sort of those types of things, then can we use this technology safely in an enterprise way with all the checks and balances that you would everything else? And I think that's sort of where we'll probably end up, or at least that's the way that we've seen some of the things where, at least that's what we've seen, at least from our interactions, where folks are ending up.
Has it been any different, building this company based around AI versus your last startup, and or is it sort of like you were saying before on the user experience side, kind of the same first principles of how you build a business and how you build a technology platform?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is really my previous company was very horizontal. So it's like it sort of does a little bit of everything, right? So for Sixfold, we are very, very verticalized, meaning like we only do underwriting.
Yep.
And so the cool part about that was that we have a hyper verticalized product, we have a hyper verticalized sales motion, we have a hyper verticalized support motion. And
Yep.
so in a way, it flexes a different skill set because we can just really be very tailored. Before, like, the scope was so wide that you had to carve it out, in terms of like, this is what that solution was for X, this is what that solution is for Y. But here it's like, if everything is about underwriting, I can go pretty deep into the conversations, into the marketing, into all of the different things around underwriting. And I think that that motion is a little bit different because the actions that you take and decisions that you take are a little bit different as well.
So, taking account for the differences of a horizontal versus a vertical solution, were there any particular lessons that you learned in the last business that you kind of brought to the table and made sure to follow as you built this company?
Yeah, I think it still goes back to sort of a people thing, I would say, altogether, right? At least for me, I did not think we would be building a underwriting AI solution. We sort of just fell into it. And a big reason I think, and the testament to our success is actually the people that we brought into the table. And so, I joined my last company for the same reason. It was for the people. Same thing for this one. It was like, all right, I think we can do this. And we brought on really, really great people. And that's sort of that culture from the ground up. I think that was really important. And so I think that's something that, I'll continue to take on.
So you've been a co-founder, and I think in your first business, you elevated up to COO, and now you're a COO again. A lot of times I'm talking to founders and the founder challenges. Do you think there's any sort of particularly unique challenges of being the co-founder or the COO and taking on that kind of responsibility in a growing business like this?
I mean, I think it's sort of what you make it. I think, like the co-founder title is cool because you definitely have a lot more responsibility. I would say that. But I think the piece of it is that you make it what you want it to be, right? During my first time as COO, I think I I was still learning, and actually I'm still learning right now. But, I think the first iteration of this is like, I realized what I really love doing, what I didn't really like doing, and all the things that I just had to do. And I think that's the thing with the CEO role altogether. If nothing else fits, like if it doesn't fit in anything else, I basically have to take care of it, right? So like that's just par for the job. And but at least now, like I think now that it's the second time doing it, like I know which pieces of my job that I actually really love and would like to protect, and know that in order for me to do the other parts of my job really well, I still need to do this because it brings me joy. And so I think knowing that balance was really important for me as I decided to do this another time around. And I think I'll just continue to learn again what I like and what I don't like and what I just have to do.
And so were there particular qualities in the team that excited you? And then also, are there particular qualities you look for in adding to your team now, particularly at this stage of growth?
Yeah, for something that Alex, Brad, and I actually did when we first started Sixfold was like we actually sat down and wrote down some operating principles. They're similar to like company values, but like they're a little bit more tangible just because we're such a small company. And there are things like, that we just want to agree on, right? Like that, like customer first mentality. We also had curiosity was a really big one. We also never wanted to buy, like, we never wanted to build commodity technology. So like, there's like a few things in terms of like both like acting things for the company, but also like things that were like exemplary of the people, that like, we want people to be direct, but we also want people to be kind. Right. So and it helped us sort of guide, I would say our hiring. We ear a lot on the cultural fit because we're a small company, and we'll probably still will be a small company for some time. But we do a lot of work for a small company. So I think it's following those sort of principles, like sort of doing all that is really important for us.
And what advice would you give to other operators, probably particularly at a similar stage, but maybe in general, in trying to balance kind of innovation, culture, and then scale?
I would just prioritize, just ruthlessly prioritize. Like, I think you as an operator, at a minimum, that's one thing that you can do for everyone else. Because there's always a laundry list of things that you need to do or you want to do. But I guess like it's helping everyone just sort of understand what's the most important things. What is the North Star? What's the big goal? And then you can sort of figure out from there. And the goal could be something for the next week. It could be for the next year. But I think for all good COOs that I see in the market, they have a really good sense of, what drives the organization and how do you put enough infrastructure into that organization that people are riding towards that goal without sort of holding them back.
All right, great. Well, Jane, anything we haven't covered that you'd like to touch on today before we wrap up?
No, this was great. Thank you so much.
All right, great. Well, Jane Tran, co-founder and COO of Sixfold AI, which I believe can be found at Sixfold AI on the web and on LinkedIn and other socials. Thanks so much for joining me on the InsurTech Leadership Podcast today.